Okay, guys, welcome to the Thursday directions video. Just going to continue on our notes. Last little bit here, last note day of the unit, I believe, which is cool to see. Today we're going to talk about England and kind of their own little, it's Reformation style. It's a reform. We're going to get a creation of a brand new church. It's called the Church of England, and the story behind it is pretty mind-boggling, kind of hilarious in some cases if you have kind of darker humor. So hopefully that's you, because I'm going to make a couple of jokes about that, because it is interesting. It's kind of one of those, can't believe that happened in history type stuff. So let's just dive into it here. So the Church of England, okay, it all starts with this man named Henry VIII. All right, so in 1522, King Henry asked the Pope to annul or cancel his marriage. It's very important that you could not divorce people under the Catholic Church at this time. So if you wanted to end your marriage, what you would have to do is go to the Pope and you would have to explain to him how the marriage should have been illegal in the first place. All right, so you should say, yeah, but in the first place, we shouldn't have got married because we broke this law or something. So you kind of come up with a couple of reasons on why your marriage is null in the first place. It's really hard to do. And so the Pope refuses to grant this guy his divorce. So what he does then is he basically just says, okay, Pope, I'm going to make my own church then. So he ends up taking the church from the Pope's control and creates his own church called the Church of England, where he's going to be the head of the church, where now he can make the rules. Thus, now I can divorce my wife. Okay? And thus the Reformation begins. So here's kind of the tale. All right? Early on, our main guy today is this guy right here, young Henry VIII, King Henry VIII. He's our main guy. Well, when he's a young boy, he is not the first in line. It's actually this guy named Arthur, Prince of Wales, who's supposed to be the king. Arthur ends up dying, and young Henry takes over. Okay, now, this guy, Arthur, was going to marry this girl named Catherine of Aragon, right here. He was going to marry her, but he ended up dying. Okay, so they never got married. Well, young Henry, at this time in England and in Europe, it was illegal to marry your brother's widow. So it's illegal to marry your brother's wife if he dies. But Henry does it anyways because he just falls madly in love with Catherine of Aragon. So he marries her. Right after his elder brother Arthur died, Henry became the heir to the throne. Arthur was married to Catherine of Aragon, but never was able to consummate the marriage. Spain and England wanted to keep their alliance, even with Arthur's death. So Henry married Catherine instead, Arthur's widow. No papal disposition was given, and Henry never consented to the marriage. Okay, so we can kind of start to see his claim for divorce already creating, right? He technically broke a law to marry her. So when he wants to divorce her later down the line, he's going to use that law as why he should get a divorce. All right, so Henry claimed that God punished him by denying him a legitimate male heir, which obviously for a king is really important. You want to keep your bloodline in control. But to do that, you have to have a son, okay? And King Henry is not having a son, and he thinks he's cursed by marrying his brother's widow. All right, so God does, it's in like the Leviticus here, God does threaten childlessness if a man marries his brother's widow, so Henry come to see his marriage as cursed. Henry had 6 children with Catherine, but only one survived to childbirth, and it was a girl. But he also had another son from like his housekeeper or something like that. So he had a male, but it was a illegitimate son, so he's not the heir to the throne. Kind of like, we don't worry about that. We just keep that kid off to the side and we don't tell anybody. Okay? So later he tried to annul his marriage so he can marry another woman, Anne Boleyn. So Henry starts to get a wandering eye. Right? He's like, Catherine, we're not doing so great. I don't have any sons yet. I need to find another girl who can give me a son. So I need to find a way out of this marriage. All right. So what he does then is he eventually just takes the crown away from the Pope and declares himself the head of this new church called the Church of England. All right. So again, you can see here, and he does this all just to divorce Catherine so he can now marry Anne Boleyn. And if you want to, just keep track of what happens to all these ladies. There's going to be like 6, I'm going to say. I think there's 6 wives. So keep track of what happens to them. So for number 1, write down Catherine of Aragon, divorced. Okay, so there's going to be a theme here. It's kind of a little pattern. So Catherine of Aragon, divorce. Write that down. And then on the quiz will be a timeline of what happens to each one. So Catherine of Aragon, divorce, jot it down. Need to know that. All right. Also want to know Church of England, and the question is going to be who's the head of it? Henry VIII. Okay. So next up comes Anne Boleyn, the one who's supposed to give him the male heir. All right. So Anne Boleyn becomes Henry VIII's second wife, but since his first, Catherine of Aragon, was still living, many Catholics felt that her child Elizabeth was illegitimate. All right. So basically, there's another girl, a daughter named Elizabeth. That was the only one that survived from the last marriage. People are kind of like, well, is she the heir to the throne then? Is she going to be queen? Or now that he's remarried, is Elizabeth like off the family tree? So there's kind of like some question marks. This doesn't happen a lot in Europe, so people are kind of confused. But we'll get to the end of that story. But Anne Boleyn, when she failed to produce a male heir, there was rumors that she was infertile and an adulteress. And by that time, Henry had met another lady named Jane Seymour. Anne tried to woo Henry back, but he had her charged with adultery and incest, sleeping with her brother George. They're basically all lies. He's making this stuff up so that they can go to court and that he can try to divorce her again, right? Just basically do the same thing. So now he can go for Jane Seymour, right? And it's all based on him not having a son, all right? You get this other guy named Thomas More. We're going to kind of skip over him. Basically, when you get tried as an adulteress, it's a high crime during this time. Okay, so it's like viable by death. Okay, so Tower of London, this is where they're kept. Anne Boleyn is kept, right? Same with Thomas More, another friend of Anne Boleyn. I'm just going to kind of skip through this. These are real pictures of the place. Well, eventually, Anne Boleyn gets found guilty, and like I said, it's guilty by death. So she gets executed, beheaded. And so does her friend Thomas More, right? So here's the place here. This was taken by my high school history teacher. He went there, and so you get the actual spot right here. There's a little memorial for them. Pretty cool. And then next up, so we got divorced Catherine, Anne Boleyn, killed, or beheaded. So let's go divorce, beheaded. Now we get Jane Seymour, and Jane Seymour, we'll just skip over that. Queen Jane Seymour showed favor to Mary, but treated Elizabeth well. And these are just talking about their kids. They're, Elizabeth and Mary are the two daughters that were still around. And the queen did finally have the male heir. So we finally got the male heir, Edward VI. This ended the sisters' succession argument, basically which one of these, Elizabeth or Mary, were going to be the queen. Well, now that Edward's born, who cares about the girls? We got a guy now. All right, but Jane, after giving birth to Edward, ends up dying, all right, in childbirth, basically after she gets sick and gets basically an infection and dies. Okay, so that's what happens with Jane. So Jane actually gives him the son, Edward. Let's write that down. Who gives him the male heir? It's Jane, but then she dies. So now we have divorced, beheaded, died. Okay, that's 3 wives so far. Divorced, Catherine, beheaded, Anne Boleyn, died, Jane Seymour. But like I said, though, we do get baby Edward out of the deal. So for Henry, that's a fair trade in his mind, right? So next up, number 4, Anne of Cleves. All right, so Henry VIII went on to marry Anne of Cleves. It only lasted 6 months, and Henry got out of it by saying he was impotent on the wedding night. All right, and Anne ends up becoming the adopted sister of the king. Basically divorce. But again, how crazy is that? Like, hey, I know you were my wife, now you are my sister. So just another interesting time in history. So now we got divorced, beheaded, died, divorced again. Okay, so number 4 is divorce. So Anne of Cleves, divorced. Write that down. Number 5, Catherine of Howard. Catherine ends up kind of getting the same fate as Anne Boleyn, where she is arrested. All right, so Henry then married Catherine Howard, a 17-year-old who was soon beheaded for adultery. Upon her beheading, Catherine delivered the ultimate insight, basically saying that the manhood of Henry VIII was lacking, if you catch my drift. All right, that's as far as I'll go with that one. But yeah, so the final insult, and this rumor spreads throughout the kingdom. King Henry VIII is really embarrassed by this. It's really funny. He actually has his official, physician, make a press release that says nope, Henry actually, he's pretty well endowed downstairs. And he makes this guy deliver this speech to the entirety of England. All right, and then there's some paintings that King Henry VIII had created that, let's say, it really embellishes his below the belt standard. So it's kind of funny, but she's arrested for adultery, and she's killed. Okay, so Catherine Howard killed. So we got divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded for Catherine. Next, or for the Catherine Howard. Next up, we have Catherine Parr, and Catherine Parr dies in childbirth, very similar to one of his previous wives. So Henry married for the final time to Catherine Parr, sometimes spelled Parr, but she got along well with all the children. Elizabeth stayed the third lady of the court. Only the Habsburgs still called the whore's daughter. That's like the Habsburgs are Spain, like the Spanish royal family. And Spain and England have a big time rivalry during this time. Even though how everyone is like somehow related, all the royal court of Europe is like all related. So some of them look like weird as hell because they're all like incest. But besides that, they all are very. It's like your family, but everyone hates each other. Okay, especially Spain and England, that side of the family, they really hate each other. So they don't recognize a lot of these kids as being legitimate because of how King Henry VIII was acting. So far this is the last one. So it goes divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, died. Right. So we got the patterns complete. Catherine Parr, the last one. Eventually, King Henry VIII. Eventually gets sick himself and he dies. Here's all the children that he had with his wives. You can kind of see there. Queen Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. The three surviving children. Queen Mary, her nickname is Bloody Mary. If you guys have ever played like that game when you were kids, that scary game in the bathroom. So Edward will take over. All right, he was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, a Protestant who became king at the age of 9. The Church of England expanded while he was king, but he was sickly and died at the age of 16. During his kingship, England was largely under the rule of Edward's council, which included Thomas Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, and Catherine Parr's new husband. So Catherine Parr kind of gets the good end of the deal here, or at least her husband does. And yeah, we get Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day queen. She literally ruled England for 9 days before she was kicked out. And then that's kind of where we're gonna. Queen Elizabeth is the last one that makes it, right? The daughter, Elizabeth, the original one. She ends up becoming the big winner in all this because she gets to become queen, and she becomes an awesome, awesome queen. Takes England into the new age, right? She's going to basically build England into the superpower that it was during, from this time period, think about that, 1558, to a superpower still today. But if we think about their height of their power, right, during like World War I, maybe a little bit before World War I, during the colonial expansion, it's all thanks to Queen Elizabeth. She's the one that says, yep, we're going to build this giant navy, and we're going to take over the world. And she was correct. So that's where we're going to stop for today. I know there's a couple other slides here. I'll just kind of bring it down here and what's happening. But that's basically the story of the Reformation in England. Pretty short. I'm going to put up a oversimplified video. It's kind of funny to me. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's a little bit longer, but it is pretty funny, and it goes through the entirety of King Henry VIII's, his life, basically. So it's kind of funny, though. I hope you guys like it. But yeah, that's it, guys. This is our last day of our unit here, so it's kind of nice. Which means that on Monday, we're going to review on Monday. We're probably going to review on Tuesday as well, because a lot of the kids have the ACT, so there's going to be no kids in school. So we'll probably take our quiz next Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, then we can move on to the rest of Europe during this time. So we'll kind of look at other places. And so we'll see Queen Elizabeth again, and we'll see some of the players that we saw today, and we'll just look a little more detailed. Not focused so much on religion and the church, but kind of focused on what they did in other aspects of leadership. But okay, have a good day, guys. Do something fun. Check Google Classroom tomorrow in case we post a CRT or something. All right, later.